everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Katie. I'm a qualified therapist and I'm really passionate about all things mental health, wellness and therapy. Today we're going to be breaking down the mental health condition of depression. As usual, please don't be put off by the title. Obviously nobody is dumb for not really knowing everything about depression or not knowing anything about depression, or perhaps are confused about conflicting information and things like that. And actually how we experience depression can vary greatly from person to person. So a lot of people don't have the same ideas around depression anyway. But hopefully this video will be a good starting point for you and a good summary of all the basic information that you need to know. As usual, there will be timestamps in the description. So if there's like a particular piece of information that you're looking for, a particular answer to a certain question, that should all be down below for you. So to start off with, what is depression? Let's think about a definition. Now actually there's various definitions of depression, but they all kind of contain the same thing, which is around a constant feeling of sadness, a constant feeling of a loss of interest, especially in things that usually make somebody happy or content. And this persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest is interfering with normal activity. So that's when something becomes a mental health condition, because obviously we have down days, we have sad days, which means we don't want to do certain things, we're not in the mood to do certain things. But this is when it becomes a mental health condition, when it really interferes with your day-to-day. And what I mean by your day-to-day is your job, your family, your responsibilities, hobbies, social events, seeing friends, and like basic self-care. So sleeping, showering, eating, that kind of thing. So what are the signs and symptoms of depression then? How do we recognize that in ourselves or in someone else? As I already mentioned, definitely sadness, low mood, people being kind of visibly deflated, or their language is quite negative, or, sad. They're using things like, I just can't be bothered, I don't feel up for it, I'm not in the mood, I don't want to do that. If you're feeling very demotivated. Also a sense of hopelessness. So as I'm talking about depression today, obviously it should be noted that there's mild cases of depression right through to severe cases of depression. So there is a bit of a spectrum here. So as I'm talking about these signs and symptoms, obviously if someone is experiencing them in a very extreme way, they probably have severe depression. Some people might not have all the signs and symptoms. Doesn't mean that they're not suffering from depression. It just means that it's not severe. So definitely that sense of hopelessness then, kind of like, what's the point in anything? Everything is bad and it will always be bad and nothing is good, etc. So any kind of language, again, that someone in your life is using that's quite negative and kind of filled with dread, no hope, but also in yourself as well. I think hopelessness can be a feeling. It doesn't have to be like the language that you're using. So if you've got that sense of like everything is awful, there's nothing good, it's not going to get better, those kinds of thoughts and feelings, maybe you are somebody who's suffering with depression. Some people can be quite emotional when they're feeling depressed. Not always, it can be quite a flat, empty feeling, but others, they can be very tearful, obviously as a product of that sadness, just very down, very upset, quite sensitive, so feeling very emotional and tearful at perhaps nothing or something small or something that it wouldn't normally be processed that way, but because they're not feeling great, it is getting processed in that way. Definitely like physical symptoms, like not being able to sleep, a loss of appetite, aches and pains, almost like flu-like symptoms. So just feeling very exhausted, achy, heavy. Depression to me is always like this sense of heaviness. So it's so hard to get out of bed because your whole body just feels extremely weighted and everything kind of hurts. There can be definitely a pain when it comes to depression, and emotional pain, but also physical pain as well. There's definitely a crossover between physical symptoms and emotional symptoms as well. And as I mentioned before, just a loss of interest in normal activities. So things that you would normally enjoy, or just hanging out with people, hanging out with your partner, friends, family, you're not really in the mood to do that. Definitely not feeling any kind of passion for anything. Just a loss of interest in even doing basic things like reading or watching a TV show. just anything that usually brings you some level of joy, or that you usually take an interest in, but there's just nothing there at the moment. Obviously, another major sign or symptom of depression is suicidal ideation and self-harm. So obviously, trigger warning here for anybody that is not comfortable with this particular topic. Feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter. But it is obviously important that I mention this today, because not everyone who is depressed necessarily experiences suicidal ideation or self-harm, but it certainly can be a massive symptom of feeling really low and feeling depressed. So suicidal ideation is another way of saying suicidal thoughts, or having suicidal related images, kind of like intrusive thoughts about it. And there's usually, again, a scale. So people get very worried about disclosing that they are experiencing suicidal ideation, especially in therapy, because they think, oh God, they're gonna, section me or report me or tell my GP or tell a loved one. That is not necessarily true. There's definitely a scale. So you can experience mild suicidal ideation, which I know sounds a bit strange, because you'd think suicidal thoughts are just suicidal thoughts, right? Like, it's scary regardless. But actually, a lot of people who are depressed kind of have these like background or fleeting thoughts. So they're not really strong, but they're still having an impact and they're still there. So just kind of thoughts in the back of their mind around, what's the point in being here? What is the point of existing? I don't want to be here. Is life worth living? That kind of thing. But they kind of pop in and out, or they're kind of like background noise. Obviously, we can progress up the scale, and somebody who is at immediate risk is someone with overwhelming thoughts around it, to the point where they're taking it really seriously and have a plan and have a means and know exactly kind of where they want to do it, how they want to do it, all of the details. They have like a proper plan, and they've given it thought, and perhaps they've like written a note, or they've planned a day. Just, it's about the specific details. And that's what we would say someone who is at immediate risk is someone who is like actually considering actioning those thoughts, which is very different between somebody who is depressed. And this is not me minimizing it at all, but there's a difference between someone who is at immediate risk and has a plan, to somebody who is, suffering with depression, and the thoughts are there, but they know on some level that they're not going to act on them, and it is more just these horrible thoughts that they're having, which is very distressing, but they know that there's a separation there in terms of like, I'm not going to actually do anything. So that's definitely important for people to look out for in other people, but also yourself as well. If you are somebody who feels like you are at immediate risk, please contact somebody, please tell somebody. I'm going to leave lots of details down below around like helplines. You can call 999, you can call 111, you can take yourself to the hospital, or just, like tell somebody that you feel like you are at immediate risk. I would also encourage you, if you're experiencing mild suicidal thoughts, to obviously tell someone as well. And there's a lot of shame and a lot of stigma around this, as well as self-harm, which I'll get to in a moment. And it can really help just by naming it and sharing it with someone and having somebody name it back. If you are in a position of support, whether that's as a friend, a partner, or as a professional, I really want to encourage you to actually use the word suicidal thoughts, or self-harm, or suicidal ideation. We need to move away from avoiding using that language. There is a fear that if we say the word suicide to somebody, it's encouraging them to do it or something, or they're more likely to do it, or something like that. That is not true. It actually helps to name it. And sometimes if we are avoiding it too much, like if we're kind of skirting around the issue, then we're not giving them the support that that person directly needs. Sometimes we do need to be quite direct in naming something, and it can actually ease the weight of it and ease the stigma. So moving on to self-harm then, really similarly, there is a lot of stigma around it in terms of like people misunderstanding. First thing I want to say is there's lots of different ways that somebody can self-harm. So I think everybody has a particular image of their minds, usually, it's usually based on what we've seen on TV or perhaps heard from peers at school and things like that. And obviously this does happen, but we usually focus on like cutting, but it can be different things as well. It can be like burning, like with like cigarettes or flame, any kind of flame. It can be self-harm, can be engaging in risky behaviors. So like unprotected sex, taking drugs, drinking lots of alcohol, taking yourself out in the middle of the night, not caring about yourself, basically, making choices that puts you in danger in an intentional way. It's not necessarily that the person wants something really bad to happen to them, but there is intent behind it in regards of harm. And the really important thing to know about people that self-harm is that it's actually a coping mechanism. Now, it's not a positive coping mechanism or a healthy coping mechanism, and obviously it's dangerous often, and it's harm, so it's not good, but it is a coping mechanism. So we need to be really careful before judging somebody for using it as a coping mechanism. There is a release there. People who self-harm do it for a reason, and it's because they're getting rid of some sort of emotional pain, or it's helping them process trauma, or it's helping them kind of contain how they're feeling and get it out of their system. So there's lots of different reasons why people do it, and it helps, and it usually works in some capacity, and that's why they keep doing it. It's not, if it didn't work, then it would be like a one-off, and then, you'd never do it again. But the reason why people get into a bit of a self-harm cycle is because it works. So that's one thing I want to say in terms of obviously firstly about all the different types to kind of look out for, not just kind of one box of self-harm, but also not to be judgmental of somebody that is self-harming, or judging yourself for it as well, because it is a coping mechanism that people have relied on in a way in order to prevent them from escalating to the point of suicide or suicidal ideation and that kind of thing. But obviously we do want to support people to not self-harm. So it really is about giving them a non-judgmental space and helping them figure out how to release their pain in a different way and how to develop new coping mechanisms. And it's like a slow process. It's not like an overnight thing where they're just suddenly going to stop and figure out something else to do. So it's a bit of a journey in terms of self-harm. But again, just going back to signs and symptoms, that can obviously be a sign of depression, is somebody who is self-harming. So next I want to talk about different depression disorders. Obviously we're kind of talking about depression as a whole in a way, and the kind of common signs and symptoms across the board, but there are specific depression disorders as well. So the first one I want to start off with is seasonal affective disorder. So this is, and it's kind of in the name, a type of depression that happens during a particular season. It usually happens in winter because obviously in winter it's very dark, there's no sunlight. It can be a very challenging time for people because Christmas, if you celebrate Christmas, the kind of expectations around that, the weather and long nights, and it's harder to get out of bed, and it's harder to exercise, and it's harder to go to work, and everything can feel a lot heavier and harder in winter months. But it can happen in any season. So again, the symptoms are really similar to the ones that I've already mentioned. People can definitely socially withdraw, become quite irritable, obviously experience low mood, that loss of interest as well in their usual day-to-day activities, definitely feeling very tired, being in bed a lot more, and just a loss of pleasure and joy during that time. It's hard to concentrate as well, a feeling of being very lethargic. In terms of the causes of SAD, as it's known as, particularly in winter, people say it's definitely the reduced level of sunlight, and there's a change in your body's natural rhythm. And there's also research to suggest that we have a lot less serotonin in the brain during these months, and more melatonin, which makes us sleepier, more lethargic. But there can be, as I said, there can be a whole host of reasons, particularly as it is a tricky time of year for a lot of people. In terms of how to get support for SAD, I'm going to talk about general support for depression near the end of this video, but you can do light therapy. There's SAD lamps. Yeah, I actually have one in this office. Let me just show you. And basically what those SAD lamps help is just to reduce the symptoms of your seasonal depression. But of course, go speak to your GP, consider antidepressants, talk to a therapist. I know for me that I've noticed that I tend to get in touch with therapists or re-engage in therapy during the winter months, which I don't think is a coincidence. So definitely speak to somebody if you think that will help you kind of see through that time of year, and just trying to get as much natural sunlight as possible. So when, obviously, because it's dark for so much of the day, try and go outside and get as much sunlight as you possibly can during the day. Another one that I want to talk about is PDD, which is Persistent Depressive Disorder. So this is when you have depression for quite a long period of time, or it takes up most of your day, week, months, years. It's not as severe as like clinical depression, but it's way more ongoing. It's way more chronic. It's that kind of persistent feelings of low mood again, sadness, hopelessness, irritability, and it becomes your normal, so to speak, because it takes up the majority of the day, also for a long period of time. So people have had it for like years. With persistent or chronic depression, obviously, you definitely want to seek treatment for that. I'm going to go into the different ways to treat depression later on in the video, but this is something that if you really feel like this has been going on for a long period of time, and perhaps you've tried certain things and it's still persistent, it's definitely time to kind of revisit your treatment plan and perhaps even get a diagnosis of PDD to really support you. Next, I want to talk about postnatal depression. So postnatal depression is a type of depression that a parent experiences after having a baby. It can actually happen to the parent that's carried the child, obviously, but it can also happen to the parent that didn't give birth to the child. So there's like a misconception that it has to be the person who's given birth or the mother, but it can be either parent that can have. It's more common, obviously, with the person that has given birth, but it can be with either parent, and it is quite common. So 1 in 10 women who have given birth have experienced postnatal depression. So it is actually statistically quite a prevalent type of depression. I want to say that obviously this is different to the baby blues. So the baby blues is what happens like 2 weeks, kind of like for a 2-week period after giving birth, where people are very tired, very emotional, sad, their whole life has been disrupted, and their body's just gone through a lot when it comes to obviously giving birth after carrying a child for 9 months. That's very normal and very common. Postnatal depression is when it's more continuous than that, and it's like months after, weeks after giving birth. So the baby blues are very normal, and postnatal depression is when things you might need to get some extra support. It can start at any time during the first year after having a baby. In terms of signs and symptoms, it's all the stuff that I've already mentioned in terms of low mood and feeling hopeless, but it is also that sense that you can't really look after yourself or your baby. It might even be scary, intrusive thoughts around hurting your baby, which is really hard for people to obviously share and admit to, understandably, but the reason I'm saying it is because it is a symptom of postnatal depression. It doesn't mean that you actually are going to do anything or want to do anything. It's an intrusive thought as part of feeling depressed. Some people don't notice that they have postnatal depression because it can be this gradual thing, and also you're so busy as a new parent, so it's like go, trying to take each day as it comes, trying to cope with looking after this new baby, and it's this gradual thing that can sneak up on you. It's really important with postnatal depression to catch it early before it really escalates and turns into like a severe case. So if you are feeling down after having a child, I would really encourage you to talk to people, go to your GP, etc. All the things that I'm going to say later on. And if you know someone that's just had a baby, it's always worthwhile checking in on them. Even if they seem fine, just keep checking in and just offering support. So like cooking food for them, offering to do a bit of cleaning, offering to look after, help look after the baby, or just, chat to them on the phone. People who suffer with postnatal depression can become very withdrawn and very isolated. So just being there to chat to can be really helpful. It's also worth noting that depression in pregnancy is also really common as well, and this is antenatal depression. And then the final one I want to talk about is PMDD. So this is also known as Pre-menstrual Dysphoric Disorder. So PMS is really common. So PMS is the symptoms that you experience in your cycle, around your menstrual cycle, that are like bloating, bad skin, nausea, headaches, feeling grumpy, feeling low, feeling sensitive, feeling a bit emotional, irritable, that's very normal. PMDD is a more severe version of that. So people, again, as a result of where they're at in their cycle, suffer with anger, rage, severe low mood, severe irritability, feeling very depressed, again, like clinically depressed, like not being able to get out of bed, not being able to take part in their day-to-day lives, etc. If you've noticed that in certain times of the month things are extremely severe, that you've got like lasting, persistent anger or irritability, or you feel really isolated, you can't go to work, you can't get out of bed, you're very emotional. If everything feels a bit more extreme, then you might have PMDD, and I would really encourage you to do some research into what can help you in terms of where you're at in your cycle, but of course also go speak to your GP as well. So I've only covered a few there. Obviously, there's many different types of depression. I would really encourage you to do your own research, but fundamentally, I don't want people to get bogged down in like, do I have this type? Do I have that type? If you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling the symptoms of depression, that's still valid, that still matters, and you can still seek all the support or try all the different things. It doesn't matter if you don't fit in a particular specific type of depression. It's just helpful, particularly ones around pregnancy and your cycle or the time of year, to have that awareness, because then there's more specific things that we can do to support ourselves and to support others. So moving on to what causes depression. So there's many different types of causes of depression. One is like an upsetting, triggering, extremely stressful life event. So this could be a breakup, a death, a bereavement, a injury. We see a lot of people who are athletes or sports people, or just, that's where they get their joy from, is going to the gym or playing sports, that when they suffer with an injury that is like a permanent injury, then they kind of enter a period of depression, because I guess in a way it's grief as well. They're kind of grieving the life that they had or the thing that they really used to enjoy. It can be a divorce, it can be getting fired, it can be a family situation, like your parents getting divorced, or somebody moving away, a car accident, an illness, either yourself. So again, it obviously can be very upsetting and distressing to have a illness, especially a severe illness where you're in hospital, or your whole life's been disrupted, and you're constantly feeling unwell, or you're constantly in pain. Anything chronic like that, there's definitely a link to depression as well, because again, life is just not what it once was, and there's that sense of hopelessness. Obviously, I mentioned losing your job, also being made redundant, or just having like money concerns in general. So just the cost of living crisis that we're in the UK at the moment, things becoming more expensive, not being able to afford certain things, struggling to put food on the table, all of which can definitely cause somebody to feel quite depressed. It can also be childhood issues kind of rearing its ugly head. A lot of the time as children are very resilient. So there can be this thing of, if there's particular trauma in the household, or it's just a difficult household to be in, it's like, I just need to get to 18 and leave, and I've processed it, I just need to get out, and then that you very much move on with your life. But these things can come back and kind of rear its ugly head. And so you might be feeling depressed because there's something that you've not processed yet. And you might not know exactly what that is, but definitely it's important to be aware of that. This might be something rooted in the past that you're just starting to feel physically and emotionally in the present. Can be genetics as well. So if you've got a history in your family of clinical depression, particularly somebody in your immediate family, like a parent, then there is, it's likely that is playing a factor in you having depression right now. It's not usually the sole reason, it's still usually triggered by like a life event or something else, but genes definitely can play a role in terms of the likelihood of you experiencing depression. It can be caused by alcohol or substance misuse. So there's definitely a link between when we're depressed, sometimes we go to alcohol or substances to cope. but it also can be a direct cause to feeling depressed as well. So tends to be a vicious cycle. It can also be caused by certain medications. That's definitely something to look out for. You will see in some medications that side effects are low mood, irritability, all those things that I've been talking about in this video. So if you're feeling a shift in your mood and you are taking something at the moment, definitely have a look into that, because there might be something there. And obviously other mental health conditions as well. So I'm going to talk more about this later, but basically, obviously, if you're suffering with anxiety or panic disorder or any kind of, mental health condition, as part of the struggle with that, you might also be suffering with depression. I see clients all the time that predominantly are struggling with their anxiety or their OCD, but they definitely have depressive episodes as well as part of that, because it's a day-to-day struggle. It's a really hard thing for them to cope with. So there's definitely that connection there as well. So how does depression impact people day to day? So I read the other day that the World Health Organization in, I think it was 1997, said that depression was the second biggest cause of disability around the world. And that kind of statement that I read really sums up how it impacts somebody day to day, because it really does disable people, as in it stops people from functioning in their usual way. And that statement was backed up in kind of more recent, I think it was like 2007 or 2010 research that said that people who suffer with chronic depression were really similar to people suffering with chronic illnesses like angina, arthritis, asthma, and diabetes. So really what we're talking about here is quality of life. It really can impact a person's quality of life. It can affect their ability to do basic things like cleaning, like maintaining their household, like cleaning themselves, basic hygiene. It can really affect relationships, so finding a partner, maintaining a relationship, keeping in touch with friends, going out seeing friends, keeping in touch with family, not having a negative impact on certain people. And what I mean by that is because if you're irritable or isolated or withdrawn, that can create tensions in a household. And so it all kind of builds up into this picture sometimes where people are becoming even more isolated, because perhaps the people that they have in their lives aren't coping very well with their depression or accepting it either. So relationships is one massive area that gets impacted. Difficulty holding down a job or finding a job, maintaining a job, going to work, saving money, being able to even budget or pay their bills, keep up to date with their finances. There's also kind of going back to the relationships thing, there's a lot of stigma with depression as well. The shame that they feel about themselves, but also that they might unfortunately be experiencing from other people. There can be like a severe lack of understanding, so people might be not accepting that they're taking time off work, or just not being particularly understanding, or a partner might not really understand why somebody's kind of not getting out of bed or isn't engaging as much. And so that can make it even worse, obviously, if they're feeling quite stigmatized. I already mentioned substance misuse, alcohol dependency is definitely another way that it can affect people, because they're trying to find a bit of escapism or a way to cope or a way to kind of get through the day, and just that loss of what used to make them happy. So hobbies, groups that they used to be a part of, anything that usually sparked a bit of joy or that they had an interest in, it all kind of can go during a depressive episode. I touched on this before, but how does depression connect with other mental health conditions? So as I've already said, depression can be a massive part of nearly all other, not only like mental health conditions, but physical health conditions as well. Because as I said, when someone suffers with a chronic illness or is diagnosed with something, or has an injury or is in chronic pain, depression tends to be a part of that. But again, in the same way that anyone suffering with OCD, anxiety, bipolar, and eating disorder, depression can be a massive part of that as well. Particularly, I want to touch on bipolar. I might do a whole video on bipolar, but just to touch on the fact that obviously bipolar can be categorized by having phases of mania. So lots of energy, lots of excitement, lots of kind of doing those risky behaviors, a lot of kind of quick decisions, fast pace, and everything seems quite positive, to those long periods of clinical depression. So not being able to get out of bed at all, not being able to speak, not being able to move really, everything slowing right down. So depression, severe clinical depression, is definitely a part of bipolar disorder, as well as all other mental health conditions. But it varies in the spectrum. So I've used an extreme example there when it comes to bipolar. That doesn't mean that if you're suffering with anxiety or OCD or an eating disorder or PTSD, that you're going to have severe clinical depression. It just means that you might be experiencing symptoms of depression as part of that. So how do you get a diagnosis of depression then? So the first thing you do, I've mentioned it a few times, is you book an appointment with your GP. Hopefully you have an understanding GP, a supportive GP. Obviously I have mentioned stigma before. I like to think that, most people would be really open to having that conversation with you about your kind of symptoms and what you're experiencing and any kind of life events. But unfortunately, hopefully rarely, but unfortunately it does happen where you might get a bit dismissed or just kind of prescribe medication straight away without that conversation. But having the conversation with a healthcare professional is definitely the first step. That they'll assess kind of whether or not you've had these symptoms for over 2 weeks, because again, it's not that they're trying to dismiss you, it's more that you could just be having like a down couple of days, which is still not nice and not pleasant, but they want to kind of assess like, is this depression? Is this something that you're slipping into? So if you've been suffering for more than 2 weeks, definitely book an appointment with your GP and they will assess you and they will ask you lots of questions. So they will definitely assess risk. They will definitely ask you if, as part of your depression or what you're experiencing at the moment, are you suicidal? Do you have suicidal thoughts? Please be honest about that. As I said, there is a spectrum. They're not just going to completely panic at you if you say that you have. And it's worth saying, no matter where you're at in that spectrum, whether you are at immediate risk or not, it's always worth sharing that you're experiencing suicidal ideation. So they'll definitely ask you about that, but they'll ask you about any kind of life events recently, perhaps any medication that you're already on, just painting that picture of what's kind of been going on with you that could have led you to this place that you're at now. They might also ask you about like your medical history or your family history, your kind of lifestyle as well. Again, just painting that picture of like where your life's at. Are you kind of getting up? Are you drinking? Are you isolated? And part of that as well is asking about your home environment, who you live with. Are you alone? What is that situation like? Then obviously we move on to treatment and recovery. So once you've kind of had that conversation with your GP, they might prescribe you antidepressants. There's so many different types of antidepressants. I'm going to leave a link down below from, I believe it's the NHS website, or a website where it will break down all the different types of antidepressants. The thing about antidepressants is that it's trial and error. So you might find one straight away that work great. There can be a bit of a dip before you start to feel the effects of them. That's really normal, is to kind of feel a bit worse before you feel better, just to kind of warn you about that. But you might also get side effects. Some, definitely can cause things like night sweats or low sex drive or perhaps nausea, that kind of thing. Or there's so many different side effects, and they're not necessarily permanent side effects. Your body's adjusting to obviously something new inside your body. So it doesn't mean that they don't work. But unfortunately, there is a bit of a waiting game with antidepressants to see like, are these helping? Are they affecting me? Do I need to up the dosage? Do I need to try a different type of antidepressant? And this is why having an ongoing conversation with your doctor about it is really important, and making sure you're taking them properly. So, I've definitely worked with people that have been prescribed antidepressants that sort of forget to take them, or take them, every now and then. And, that kind of thing obviously is not going to work in order to really see if it's something for you. And be careful when you decide to come off them. So you should never just come off them instantly, because then your body starts to go through withdrawal. So definitely kind of weaning yourself off them as well. Again, definitely make sure you maintain communication with a healthcare professional about this. Your GP will also probably refer you to NHS counselling. I'm talking obviously in the UK. Unfortunately, the waiting lists for free counselling can be extremely long. If you have the means to try private therapy, obviously that is also an option. In terms of talking therapy or CBT, there's lots of different types of therapy out there. It's worth definitely doing your research in terms of what kind of style of therapy you think would benefit you. Are you somebody that just kind of wants the freedom to talk, to process that childhood trauma, for example? Or is it that you just want to tackle the symptoms? You're sick of feeling this way, you're sick of feeling tired, and it's not really anything that you need to process, but it's more you want to tackle the symptoms of depression, then maybe CBT is more beneficial for you. So definitely figure out what is suited before contacting some therapists and having those consultations. Or obviously you can wait on the NHS waiting list and eventually be assigned a counsellor there. There is also a period where the GP or the healthcare professional will call like watchful waiting, and basically it's just to see if the depression kind of eases on its own. We can all in life go through a depressive episode, particularly after a stressful life event, and it doesn't mean that we're suffering with chronic depression or clinical depression. It just means that we're depressed because this awful things happen and it's hard to process, but then you might start to feel better or feel more like yourself. So there can be a period of watchful waiting in case that happens before a more kind of clinical treatment takes place. Something else, and this is more for mild depression, is that your GP might give you kind of guided self-help. I definitely had that years ago. I went to my GP and was suffering with like anxiety and depression, and they gave me this like online module. It was kind of like self-help CBT. So it was something that I just went through myself on my computer at home, and it was helpful. I still went for therapy because I wanted to actually talk to a person about a few different things, but that can be something to, especially bridging that gap between waiting for a therapist and, you know, not having any support. It's better than nothing, is to have these like guided self-help tools. Other things, and again, this is more for mild, I want to make that clear because obviously with severe depression, this isn't going to be particularly helpful necessarily, but things like mindfulness, so like actually meditating, practicing ways to be more grounded, more present. Exercise is another great thing to kind of boost your endorphins, boost your mood, get blood circulation, kind of reduce those symptoms of depression. The reason why I'm separating these from mild and severe is there's nothing more annoying than saying to somebody who's severely depressed, oh, you know, why don't you just go for a walk, or why don't you go to the gym? It's like, I'm, you know, suffering with suicidal thoughts, I can't even shower, never mind leave the house and go for a walk. So this is more for people that have a bit more capability to do that. That doesn't mean to say that if you're suffering with severe depression that eventually you can't then start bringing exercise back into your life. I just don't want to be condescending to people that are in the pits of it, and it's not very helpful advice. St. John's wort is another thing that can be recommended for mild symptoms of depression. You can get it at like Holland and Barrett or any kind of health store. There's like mixed research in terms of how it affects, but some people really love trying like the more holistic, natural ways to treat their mental health. So that's why I wanted to mention St. John's wort today, because I think it's worth trying anything that might work for you. Moving on to more severe depression then, some additional things to say. Obviously all of that still applies, you know, if you are severely depressed, definitely therapy, antidepressants, mindfulness, exercise, any kind of natural supplement, anything that you think might help. But you also might be referred to a mental health team then. So if you go to your doctor and say that you are kind of at immediate risk, or that you have self-harmed, or that you're experiencing suicidal ideation that you're really concerned about, anything like that, that they might refer you to the mental health team. Or you can take yourself to hospital or A&E and refer yourself, like you can self-refer to the mental health team as well. And then it kind of goes from there in terms of a more clinical approach to your depression. So more kind of keeping you in the hospital, looking after you basically, for people that really are in that severe state. So talking to a psychiatrist as well, rather than a therapist, having a treatment plan more kind of clinically mapped out for you. Something else that I don't have a lot of knowledge about, but it's just worth mentioning, is that when all avenues have been explored, something else that has been tried before is brain stimulation. So because a lot of depression is in the brain, obviously it's a mental health condition, something to get the serotonin and the dopamine and just like the neurons firing, get somebody back to their normal selves, there is brain stimulation. I'll leave a link about it down below, because again, I'm not fully equipped to kind of do it justice as from a personal perspective or a therapeutic perspective. I don't know anyone that's gone through brain stimulation before. Please let me know if you have in the comments below, if you feel comfortable to share. It's definitely an option of treatment when it comes to depression. And helplines as well. Somebody who's really isolated or doesn't kind of know who to turn to, there are many different helplines that you can call, especially when it's like an awkward time, you know, perhaps you don't feel like you can ring a friend or you can speak to a family member. There's nowhere to go, like you can't see a GP or you don't have an appointment with your therapist. There's, you know, those moments during depression where you're just completely on your own and you can't wait. You can't really wait. You're scared of the thoughts that you're experiencing. You're scared of how severe your mood is. And that's why helplines exist. So you pick up the phone and definitely share how you're feeling. And sometimes it is just so helpful just to talk to somebody. And that's what they're trained in, is to kind of talk you through and get you to, not obviously cure your depression, but get you to a more grounded place. And again, information will be down below. So that kind of brings us to the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful. As I said, I'm going to leave lots of links and resources down below. If you are someone who is struggling with depression, or you think you might be, or you've got a loved one, or you know, somebody in your life that you think might be struggling with depression and you sort of don't know where to start in terms of how to support them or what links to send them, hopefully everything down below will be really helpful. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like it if you found it useful. Please subscribe to my channel. I make educational videos like this. I also do more kind of fun things like talk about TV shows and react to TV therapy and stuff like that. There's vlogs as well. So please subscribe to my channel if you're interested in that. Follow me on Instagram. I post reels about kind of how to prepare for your first therapy session and other content like that. So please follow me on Instagram there. Check out my website as well below if you're interested in therapy sessions with me. And yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening, depending on when you're watching this, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.